It may be a full moon in Aries, friends, but let me tell you, we are deep in the transformative waters of Scorpio right now. More about that later, but first, welcome to the House of Good Spirit. I'm your host, Whitney Kranz of Astro Arcana. Consider me your mystic sis, your astro bestie, and it's my God's given duty to translate the otherworldly wisdom of the cosmos into down-to-earth insights. Here in the House of Good Spirit, this is our place to connect deeply with the lunations, our full moons and our new moons. This happens every other week. Why do we do this? Of course, it's so we can consciously move through our own growth. And if that sounds like your jam, go ahead, like and subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. So let's overview this full moon, shall we? Aries isn't gonna like it when I say that this Aries full moon is kind of a quiet one. Why would an Aries full moon be quiet? Well, let's talk about it. This full moon takes place at 14 degrees of Aries on October 6th at 10:47 p.m. Central Time. And the reason this one might feel just a little bit more quiet is because we have had so much Aries action over the last year, actually the last several years. Just this year, we've had both Saturn and Neptune ingresses into Aries. We have had retrogrades for both Mercury and Venus around the same degrees of Aries. And we have just closed out an Aries Libra eclipse cycle that happened from 2023 until just this spring, 2025. And so looking back on all of that action, this is actually the first full moon that we are going to experience in Aries that hasn't been tied to one of those eclipses. It's almost as if this is a moment of quiet resolution of all of the Aries work that we have been doing. If we are going to look forward at what this full moon in Aries means for us, let's just step back real quick and look at how this cycle opened. So the new moon, or the seeding point of this cycle, remember new moons equate to our seeding times of initiation, and full moons are the results of that. Full moon is the blossoming or the ripening of the fruit of that seed we planted. And so the seeds that are ripening right now were initially planted under the Aries solar eclipse on March 29th of 2025. So just 6 months ago, right? And that occurred at 9 degrees Aries. Now, I've thought back to that eclipse several times. It was kind of a rough one for me. I definitely had some of those very typical eclipse season surprises. What about you? What do you remember from those Aries eclipses earlier this spring? Tell me in the chat. Now, while that was the opening of this cycle, that is the opening of what's coming to fruition right now. There's another Aries eclipse that we experienced actually the previous spring, and that was the total solar eclipse that many of us here in the United States were able to glimpse with our own two eyes. That is, if you were in a part of the country that wasn't obscured with cloud cover. That was on April 8th of 2024. And the reason why I'm bringing that particular eclipse up is that that eclipse was at 19 degrees. Remember I mentioned this Aries full moon is at 14 degrees? Now, we're about 4 degrees off, right? But close enough to consider resonant. And I'm thinking that especially because that spring 2024 Aries eclipse occurred in the same bound and decan of this particular Aries full moon. So while we may be seeing a smaller 6-month cycle coming to fruition right now, I would imagine you could look back to that 2024 spring Aries eclipse and see the through line of the story of what you're working on now that began at that time. Before we deep dive on Aries and Mars itself, I just want to state here that when I say this moon is not quite as loud as others Aries lunations we've recently experienced, that doesn't mean it's devoid of action. In fact, I think it is actually really symbolic of where we are in the year. We are entering into the season of darkness, the season where nature quiets itself, where we hibernate and go underground. And as I was meditating on the meanings of what this full moon is bringing forth for us, I was interestingly not getting a whole lot of downloads. Now, sometimes that happens. Sometimes it's just not quite as connected of a day. But more often than that, the oracle is speaking through symbols. And what that's telling me is where this lunation is happening in the inner work and the insides, behind the scenes, right? It's happening underground. And so if we know this, there's a way that in order to work with it, we can further tap into that. And so this action we're experiencing, it goes back to the fact that this full moon is ruled by Mars, who is in Scorpio right now. Scorpio is the sign of the underworld. And Scorpio is also very private and internal. And so I see these scorpionic themes coming through with this full moon just as equally, if not greater, than the Aries portion themselves. If all of this interests you, if all of this lights you up, if you're trying to figure out how this Aries full moon connects back to our previous eclipse cycle from 2023 to 2025, book a reading with me. We can absolutely take a look at where this is connected in your chart and what is blossoming now in the fire of Aries. So let's do a deep dive into the sign of Aries, like we like to do in each of our episodes. Aries is a cardinal sign and a masculine sign. A cardinal sign means that it is initiatory. Cardinal signs are the signs that introduce the four corners of our wheel of the year, aka our equinoxes and our solstices. In that way, cardinal signs usher in a new season. Now, Aries is also a masculine sign. It is yang energy, right? So instead of more of a feminine or yin sort of receiving, enveloping, this is a driving and influencing energy that is all compounded by the fact that it is a fire sign. I think we all know that about Aries. Aries is the spark of fire, the spark of action, the spark of inspiration. And why is it the spark of action? Well, because Mars is the ruler. So Mars rules Aries, and the sun is exalted here. We can think of the sun's exaltation here as a way in which, at this point, when we talk about the solar year, Aries season, at the spring equinox, that's when the sun's light begins to grow. Now, qualities that we associate with Aries are this direction of will, it's initiation. Aries is the sign of the individual. Aries is like me first, right? And Aries has so much to do with energy and action and motivation. And when we talk about that space of the year symbolically, it is so much a place of new beginnings. So when we talk about a full moon in Aries, when we talk about that ripening of the fruit, that metaphor, or what is coming to fruition right now, what is coming into being right now, there is always with Aries a sense as well that experience is an initiation, is a new beginning into a new chapter. Who are my Aries out there? You might be heavy on Aries energy if you are the one who starts a project without a plan. Who are the Aries here who get a game and they don't look at the instructions? They dive right in. You go to IKEA, buy a piece of furniture, and you're like, screw it, I don't need the instructions, right? One of the most wonderful things about Aries energy is Aries are the first to raise their hand to contribute, right? Aries, you've got a burning energy, a burning passion for your pursuits. And in that way, you delight in competition, right? Like, I think of my husband who's an Aries, and next weekend he is running a race, right? Like for Aries, it's not fun if it's not a competition, if it's not a race. There is a difference too when we talk about all of this sort of Marsy solar energy that comes through Aries. What's the difference between an Aries Mars and a Scorpio Mars? We're going to keep talking about that a little bit because, as I mentioned, with Mars and Scorpio, it's important that we look at the difference. And to me, what comes to mind immediately are our Hellenistic gods, our Roman gods, Ares and Athena, right? Ares, we know, is the god of war. Athena is also the god of war, but she is the feminine and wily version of that expression. And so where an Aries Mars may be aggressive, forceful, sort of work in a frenzy, delight in rivalry, the more feminine version of Mars, which we can also equate to Scorpio, right? Scorpio is the feminine water sign of Mars. When we think about Athena, we think about more of the strategy of warfare, right? The discipline it takes to organize factions and muster your strength. It is intellect and the cleverness, right? The strategy behind your moves on the chessboard. It is also a defensive nature rather than an offensive nature. So it's an interesting dynamic we have when we see an Aries full moon with a Mars in Scorpio, because you're getting a little bit of both of that. And this is the perfect time for us to transition into the context of this full moon. What is happening, right? So if we look at the chart, we can obviously see that the moon is opposing the sun. The moon in Aries, the sun in Libra. The sun is actually in its fall here in Libra. The sun doesn't do so well in that part of the year, in that part of the solar year where the light begins to wane and the darkness reigns. And so here we have this tension once again across the Aries-Libra axis. It's the tension of me versus we. I'm seeing this as a very personal journey. Now, Mars is in Scorpio. I've said it 12 times already. Mars in Scorpio, here is averse to this full moon. So this full moon doesn't see Scorpio there. In that way, there is a sense of a little bit of disconnectedness, or we might say like delayed gratification of what's coming to experience right now. Now, Mars just went through a square to Pluto. That is intense energy that is tied to this Mars-Pluto cycle that's also been extremely active for about the last year, very prominently last November, last January. I'm pulling that from the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure we're right on there. At this moment, the same day of this full moon, Mercury moves into Scorpio as well. Now we have Mercury and Mars both in Scorpio. Mercury at this moment is exactly engaged in this square to Pluto. And holy moly, is that ever a sign of strategy, of planning and plotting? That is really coming through. Now, those very intense energies at this moment are mitigated just slightly by the fact that under this full moon, we have Jupiter in a sextile, in a forming sextile with Venus in Virgo, Jupiter in Cancer and Venus in Virgo. And that Venus in Virgo, she's also not doing so hot, right? She's got really, really high standards for herself that Jupiter is really working to expand right now. And that Venus is very soon, within this next cycle here, going to move into Libra. Thankfully, she gets stronger. She takes her will for collaboration with her and forms up that kite we've talked about so much, that grand air trine. But also with this scorpionic energy, we are finally starting to see as Venus forms up the air trines, we're also starting to see water trines, at least right now by whole sign aspect. But through the rest of the month, these water trines, these extremely, yes, water is emotional, but it's also generative and in that way creative. And so there's a way that all of this sort of intellect and rationalization we've been working with moves through into this creative, generative energy. And it starts with both Mars and Mercury here in Scorpio. Now, let's talk about then what the heck this all even means. We've talked a little bit about Aries. We've looked at the chart to gather context. And now we can start to determine what feelings may be coming forth for us. And as I mentioned, this is really all, I don't want to say it, but I'm going to say it. It's self-centered. It's internal. And so I'm looking at this moon first and foremost as a gathering of our responsibility and our self-governance, the way that we govern ourselves, our own emotions, the actions we take, and what motivates us to do that. I'm thinking about one of my good friends recently, you might know her, Alexandra Blair of Nine Lives Astrology, shared with me a song from the musical Hamilton. I haven't seen it, but she sent me the song. The song is actually incredibly Saturnian, but there's a line that's coming forth for me when we talk about the responsibility we have over ourselves and our own actions. And there's a line in this song, it's called Wait For It, that says, I am the only thing in life I can control. And that's that sense of responsibility that is coming through here. At this moment, we are really seeing the results of our actions of the last 6 months, maybe even the last year and a half. And we are staying the course at this moment. We are mustering that responsibility. And remember, I mentioned early in the show, we didn't dive deep into it, but this lunation is happening in Mercury's bound. And in that way, with Mercury placed in Scorpio, it is lending us this intensity of focus. And with that, there is, yes, of course, this sort of self-governing structure, right? But it is also very strategic. It is plotting. I think I used that word earlier, right? And that's what happens when we get Mars and Mercury in an aspect to Pluto, all happening across the signs of Scorpio and Aquarius. And in this way, this sort of penetrating focus that we have helps us to apply strategy to what we're working through right now. It's almost like applying strategy to our whims, right? But it's more than a whim because it's been building for quite some time. And I get the image under this lunation of like an inner council meeting. It's like the war room of your soul, right? This is like a reckoning moment of what we're going to do as, yes, we've recognized progress, but the work for Aries is never done. And that's the important thing. While Aries is a great initiator, Aries is not always a sign of follow through, right? And so that's where one of the lessons in this full moon comes forth. It's like, as we recognize our growth, how do we continue and finish out what we've created? It is happening internal. It's happening in the war room of your soul, the board meeting behind closed doors, right? And that actually is a perfect segue into my next major theme for this full moon in Aries. I mentioned earlier that it's quiet. That quietness is because this lunation is about the growth we don't see, the growth that happens behind the scenes. This is a time of our will working quietly underground, behind the scenes with determination and motivation. And yes, that excitement of Aries with Scorpio involved, it can even be obsessive, right? We are obsessed with the work we're doing right now. And because it matters so much, because we care so much, It's the work that's happening internally, the work we must keep quiet. So in a way, there is almost like this space that is created at this full moon. And while space could seem or feel empty, this is a space that's rich with personal insight. And in fact, if we're talking about a full moon as sort of the ripening of the fruit or the blossoming of this seed, right? We right now are blossoming skyward. It's like Jack and the Beanstalk, right? And the beanstalk shoots up into the heavens, right? With power and force. So in order to sustain that growth, we're digging deep inside for power. When we're working so heavily internally, there can be a sense that we are alone in it. Sometimes the Aries Libra axis can bring that up for us, these feelings of isolation versus togetherness. And I think there's an important reminder here that while so much of this work is focused internally, it doesn't have to be an internal battle, right? If it gets to that point of battling, then pour it out to your journal, pour it out to your therapist, pour it out to your astro bestie. Hey, I'm here. Pour it out to the people around you who support you, those that you trust, right? And instead of what may feel like an inner battle, let's reframe that into more of a survey of the inner landscape, right? Like a surveying of the inner landscape to ensure that the foundations we're creating are firm enough to support what's blossoming here, right? Because we talk about Aries as the exaltation of the sun, and this is happening in the sun's decan, there's also a way in which this survey of the inner landscape, potentially in a more shadow manifestation, this like inner battle that we're dealing with, there could be represented here an ego death, right? If very classically Scorpio in the tarot, for instance, is represented by the death card, that's why Scorpio we speak about as that sort of underworld journey, is because it has correlations with death. And the sun is our ego. And so with Mars and Mercury lighting up Scorpio with the sun in its full, there is a way that productively this full moon equates to an ego death. If Aries is so often me first, the sign of I am, like what comes after that? When you reframe your own inner landscape, you rework your own ego and who you are. So this full moon is asking what comes after, what new growth in who you are, in your identity, comes after this metaphorical ego death. Whether small scale or large scale, there's work to do here. Our final theme is all about sort of vulnerability and self-defense. With a moon in Aries, while often that lends us this sort of like go forward pioneering quality, a moon in Aries can also be quite vulnerable, especially when the ruler of that moon is in a sign like Scorpio. So what I would ask yourself at this time is whether you are acting from a place of vulnerability, a place of fear, and how can you transition that? How are you asked to let go? And you know, this is interesting because this is the first lunation. I mean, not only that is just a regular old moon after a couple years of Aries Libra eclipses, this is also the first full moon we are having after our eclipse season, which just closed with a Virgo eclipse. That Virgo eclipse really had us doing the work to dig deep and let go, to release what's no longer serving us. And so in that way, it's interesting. For the more advanced astro nerds out there, you may know that Aries and Virgo actually have this secret relationship called Antisha. I won't go fully into the whole concept because Antisha and Contra Antisha could really be a whole Astro 101 video in itself. But Aries and Virgo have this secret relationship with each other, this secret conjunction with each other, because they occur in times of the year with similar qualities of light. And so I'm looking at this Aries full moon as the first lunation after this Virgo eclipse as being about how we move forward from that eclipse cycle, from the changes we experienced, how we move forward with an understanding that we're not in control of external factors, right? Remember the song lyrics, I am the only thing I can control? That is so relevant in this post-eclipse period. So if I come back to the themes of vulnerability and defensiveness, how we are defending ourselves, right? Self-defense. Scorpio is a sign that is really, really strong at that self-defense. It's also a sign of really quiet intensity and regeneration. So there's something that's coming through here that is about the regenerative quality. When we defend our own selves, our own ideals, we are more strongly able to regenerate our new future, right? That is making me think back to the last Aries eclipse we had last March 29th. And remember, I mentioned in the beginning of this episode that Aries eclipse this spring, it kind of fucked me up, right? And so I'm thinking if it did for you too, we can focus on how our own defenses have grown or changed since then, how we are now more better prepared to handle the ills that come our way, how we are protecting ourselves even further. I don't bring Chiron a whole lot into my delineations transit-wise. I work with Chiron a lot in personal astrology and astrology readings, but Chiron is here in Aries and has been here in Aries through those Aries eclipses we've been through over the last couple of years. And so that's telling me that with Chiron here, the wounded healer, there is tons of potential here for healing. So what are we going to do about it, right? I mean, Aries is a sign of action, a sign of doing. How are we going to work with the energies of this full moon? Well, let's go. Aries honors action, right? Do the thing you might not be ready for. At this time, play, experiment, right? Go play a game with friends. Go play a sport. Compete, for God's sakes. You could absolutely, under this lunation, claim your independence. I say spend a day just doing exactly what you want. And this is also a reminder to channel your own inner fire, right? We already mentioned play and sport, right? But like kickboxing, especially as we talk about some of those themes of self-defense, like this would be a great opportunity to, go kick some ass safely. You know that reflection is, in my mind, one of the best things that we can do to honor these lunations. And so, as usual, I have worked up several journal prompts for you that work around these themes that we've been talking about. So let's look at them. What was torn down back in late March that you are now quietly rebuilding? What is growing beneath the surface of your life? What foundations are you laying right now that others may not see? How do you defend your will and your desires from external pressures? Are your actions currently driven by fear? Or are your actions grounded in security? And what's your worst fear about what's coming to fruition right now? How can facing those fears make you and what you're building stronger? Before we close out for the day, it is that time in the show for Astro Style. So how are we dressing? How are we integrating this Aries full moon from the outside in? Well, Aries is a fire sign, so let's wear red. I'm bringing in Scorpio too with lots of dark materials and black. I love these deep, dark, mysterious sort of colors and vibes to level out the intensity that is red. Now, Aries rules the head, so I know I've told you a couple of lunations in a row to get your hats out, and I'm doing it again. This time is for the sporty caps, the ball caps. I also wonder, is it time for a bold new hairstyle, perhaps face framing, layers, or something a little wilder, like the addition of a buzzed undercut. I don't know, you tell me. I think also if we're focusing around the head right now, this could also be just like a really great time for hoods, hoodies. We're getting into the deep fall here in the Northern Hemisphere. Things are getting a little chillier, right? So we can bundle up a little bit more, get a little bit more mysterious. They could be romantic, cape-like hoods, or sporty spice, sporty hoods, right? Throw on a hoodie and call it that. Aries is such a sign of action and so prominent in the sports world that this is a time for athleisure. Throw on your sneakers, right? You have to be able to win that race with comfortable sneakers. I also love this Aries full moon for that dose of sort of street style, that funkiness that we mix in with our athleisure. That is actually what contributes to style and not just like, oh, going to the gym. I also think that with heavy Scorpio happening here, there is a great moment to sort of play on a sporty, sexy juxtaposition. We're seeing a lot of activewear right now, or just in general, various cutouts, right? Like keyholes or suggestive cutouts, maybe in the sort of waistline of your leggings. Mars is the god of war, right? So I love this season. If you're going to top that sort of sporty, sexy street style, top that outfit with your army green jacket, We could even add shoulder detail like epaulets, right? Those little straps on the shoulders. Cargo pants are coming back. Low slung camo pants are happening right now. So this is one that you can have fun with. It's relaxed. It's go-getter energy with also a sense of mystery. Now, that, folks, is our Aries full moon. The flame has been lit from within, right? This is a time, just to review, to trust the inner work, right? To take responsibility and to honor both our strengths and vulnerabilities. If this episode resonates with you, please don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And I'd also love to hear your comments in the thread below. What are you working on behind the scenes right now? How is Aries showing up in your chart, in your life right now? Let me know. Don't forget to connect with me on Instagram. If you have a story to share about this particular lunation, I want you to contribute to this community. DM me a 1-minute video on Instagram and I'll include it in a future episode. With that, if you love this sort of thoughtful, reflective approach to astrology, don't forget, I am available. Book a reading with me, and we can apply all of this reflective work to your chart specifically. So with that, friends, happy full moon in Aries. I'll see you on the other side.